I never imagined that moving to the countryside for my dream job would put me in the middle of a neighbor war. See, when people picture rural Australia, they think of wide open skies, the smell of gum trees, the occasional kangaroo hopping across the paddock, and the sound of magpies singing in the morning. And yeah, that's all there. But what no one tells you about small country towns is that the gossip spreads faster than bushfire, and once someone decides they don't like you, you might as well be branded for life. That's exactly what happened to me, my partner, and, more importantly, my 3 dogs. Now, let me introduce you to my dogs first, because they're not just pets to me. They're family. My partner and I can't have kids, so these dogs are our children, our protectors, and our joy. They're good dogs, too. Sure, they bark. What dog doesn't? But they're not the kind that stand there and drone on for hours. They bark when someone comes near the house, when a stranger passes by, or when a suspicious noise echoes from the caravan park out the back. To me, that's not a nuisance. That's security. That's loyalty. That's exactly what I want in a place where crime isn't just a story. It's an everyday reality, and trust me, I've seen the kind of trouble this town can cough up. Just last year, some 18-year-old thought it would be clever to steal a car while it was still hitched to a caravan with a whole family of 5 sleeping inside. That's the kind of thing that happens here. That's why when my dogs bark, I don't roll my eyes. I thank them. They're guarding my home, my partner, and my pride and joy. A vintage car parked in the garage under the house. That car is special. I've spent years working on it, polishing it, loving it, and in a place where people would steal the shoes off your feet if you left them out too long. I rely on my dogs to keep watch. The neighbors on my left, they get it. He's got motorbikes he doesn't want stolen, so he doesn't complain when the dogs let out a few warning barks. In fact, he thanks me for having them around. It's like a neighborhood watch, but with fur and teeth. But the neighbors on the right, oh, they're a different breed altogether. New arrivals, city slickers. The type who come out here because one of them landed a teaching job in a rural school, which is just a stepping stone until they can get transferred back to the city. They don't belong here. They don't understand how it works here. And they've made it very clear they don't like us. Or more specifically, they don't like my dogs. Now here's the thing. They've never once had the courage to say anything to my face. Not once. When I'm home, they're as silent as church mice. No glares, no comments, nothing. But the second I head off for work, sometimes gone a week at a time, they pounce on my partner. They send her text after text, harassing her every time the dogs bark, acting like she's the villain of the street. They knock on the door, they make little digs, but only when I'm not there. And that's what gets me. It's cowardly. It's spineless. It's harassment, plain and simple. If they had a problem, they should be man or woman enough to talk to me. But no, they target her, and she hates confrontation. She doesn't want me storming over there because she's worried it'll turn ugly, so I bite my tongue. But inside I'm boiling. It reached a point where they even filed a complaint with the council. The council came out, did their little investigation, and after seeing the truth, that the dogs are normal, that they don't drone on for hours, and that everything is within reason, the complaint was closed. Case closed, right? Wrong. For the neighbors, it was just fuel for their obsession. They couldn't let it go. They wanted to control us, to control my dogs, to control my partner while I wasn't around. And that's when I made a decision. If they were going to come after my family, and yes, I mean my partner and my dogs, then I was going to fight back. Not with fists, not with violence. No, I was going to fight back with something far more infuriating. Passive-aggressive revenge. See, here in Australia, the noise rules are pretty clear. Between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., you can make as much racket as you want, and no one can say a word about it. Which got me thinking, if my dog's barking for a few seconds drives these neighbors mad, then maybe it's time I give them something even better to complain about. Something that makes them regret ever targeting us in the first place. If they want noise, they'll get noise. just not the kind they expect. And the beauty of it? Everything I do will be perfectly legal. Nothing they can report, nothing they can fight. Just the sweet, constant reminder that they picked the wrong house to mess with. That's where the fun begins. Because when it comes to annoying someone without ever laying a finger on them, the options are endless. You can crank up the music. You can whistle while you work. You can run the mower 3 times a day if you really feel like it. And the best part? Every single thing I do will take the spotlight off my dogs. Instead of wasting their days obsessing over a few barks, they'll be too busy fuming over me. And honestly, that thought makes me smile. So here I am, ready to share not just my story, but the ways I turned the tables on neighbors who thought they could bully my family into submission. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought they could scare us into silence. But what they didn't realize is that I've got patience, I've got creativity, and I've got all the time in the world to play the long game. And trust me, nothing gets under a person's skin more than someone who won't fight back the way they expect. They wanted a battle. What they got was something much worse. Me, living my life, louder and prouder than ever. This is how it all started. The first move I made was simple. Too simple, really. But sometimes the most obvious tactics are the most effective. I decided to embrace every single noise-making chore I could think of, right in that golden window between 7 in the morning and 7 at night. If they wanted silence, they were about to get the opposite. Now, I'm not talking about blasting death metal at 6 a.m. or revving my car until the engine screamed. No, that's not my style. I'm smarter than that. I wanted to walk the fine line where everything I did was perfectly legal, but undeniably irritating, so I started with the mower. Out here, keeping the grass under control is a constant job, and usually I'd knock it over in one session, neat and tidy. But now, now I took my time. I'd mow a section in the morning, another in the afternoon, and maybe even a third round just before dinner. It wasn't about efficiency anymore. It was about consistency. A low, steady hum of the mower, day after day. Not loud enough to justify a complaint, but just enough to drill into their nerves. Then came the whippersnipper, if you've ever heard one of those things. You know they make a high-pitched buzz that lingers in your skull long after the machine's turned off. I'd fire it up to tackle the edges of the yard, then set it down, take a break, have a sip of water, and start again. 20 minutes of work became an hour-long performance, and you'd better believe I positioned myself along the fence line, closest to their house, making sure they got the full benefit of my little landscaping sessions. But I didn't stop at yard work. Oh no, that was just the warm-up. See, I've got this vintage car sitting in the garage, my pride and joy. Normally I take it out on weekends or when I've got a spare moment, but suddenly I found myself needing to check on it every other day. That meant running the engine. That meant warming it up. That meant a throaty, beautiful rumble filling the air for a good 20, 30 minutes at a time. To me it was music. To them, well, let's just say I could picture the steam pouring out of their ears while they sat on their couch, grinding their teeth. The funny part is, none of this was directed at them personally. I was just a man taking care of his property, maintaining his yard, and enjoying his car. Nothing illegal, nothing they could report. And yet, every time I caught a glimpse of them through their window, I could see the frustration building, the twitch of a curtain, the stomp of footsteps, the way they'd slam a door a little harder than necessary. It was working. Slowly, subtly, I was becoming the real problem in their lives. Not my dogs. But you know what really sealed the deal? Music. Not the loud offensive kind, either. I started curating playlists that would be the perfect blend of cheerful and obnoxious. Think ABBA, think old-school country, think anything with a catchy chorus that gets stuck in your head whether you like it or not. I'd set up a speaker on my back porch and let it play while I tinkered with the car or worked around the yard. Again, all within legal hours, all within reason, but loud enough to carry across the fence. The best part? I'd sing along, badly, on purpose. I'm no rock star, but I've got enthusiasm. and that's all that matters. I'd belt out the lyrics, off-key and unapologetic, like the world's most confident karaoke singer. And every time I hit a particularly flat note, I imagined my neighbors cringing, wishing they'd kept their mouths shut about my dogs. See, that was the beauty of it. They thought they could bully us into compliance. But instead they got me. Cheerful, loud, relentless me. And here's the kicker. The happier I looked while doing it, the more it seemed to infuriate them. Because nothing drives a bitter person crazier than watching someone else enjoy life. It didn't take long before the little signs of their irritation started to spill over. One morning I noticed their blinds stayed shut until nearly midday. Another day, I caught the husband muttering under his breath as he walked past our driveway, shaking his head like a man possessed. And then came the ultimate confirmation. They stopped texting my partner. No more passive-aggressive messages about the dogs. No more harassment while I was away. Because now they had a bigger problem, me. And honestly, that was the point all along. My dogs didn't deserve to be the villains in this story. They weren't the nuisance. They weren't the problem. But the neighbors needed someone to blame, someone to focus their misery on. So I gave them what they wanted, a target. Except it wasn't the one they expected. It was me, and I was playing the game by my rules. Of course, I couldn't let it end there. Once I saw how effective my plan was, I started thinking of new, creative ways to keep the momentum going. Not every day. That would be overkill. No, I had to be clever, unpredictable. A sudden burst of noise here, a drawn-out project there. Keep them guessing. Keep them on edge. Because nothing's worse than not knowing when the next round is coming. And that's when I stumbled onto my next weapon of choice. Home improvement projects. Out came the hammer, the saw, the drill. I'd find little things to fix. A shelf that needed adjusting. A fence post that could use some reinforcement. A gate that squeaked. Each job stretched out. Each tool used with a little extra enthusiasm. Bang, bang, bang. A soundtrack of progress, echoing across the quiet street. And every strike of the hammer felt like a little victory. A reminder that I wasn't going anywhere. That I wasn't backing down. But here's the thing. The real satisfaction didn't come from the noise itself. It came from knowing that every bit of racket I made was completely justified. They couldn't file a complaint, because I wasn't breaking a single rule. They couldn't accuse me of harassment, because I wasn't targeting them directly. All I was doing was living my life, on my property, within the law. And yet it drove them absolutely mad. That's the definition of passive-aggressive revenge. Looking back, I realized it wasn't even about payback anymore. It was about balance. They tried to make our lives miserable by going after my dogs and my partner. All I did was tip the scales back in our favor. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to fight. I didn't even have to confront them face to face. All I had to do was exist a little louder, a little prouder, and let their own bitterness do the rest. And the best part? The more they fumed, the more I enjoyed myself. Because every laugh, every song, every rev of the engine wasn't just noise. It was a reminder that they had no power over me. They couldn't control my family, my dogs, or my happiness. The only thing they could control was how much it ate them alive. And from where I stood, it looked like it was eating them plenty. But oh, this was just the beginning. Because once you learn how easy it is to get under someone's skin, you start to wonder, how far can I take this? How creative can I get? And how much fun can I have before they finally snap? It wasn't long before I realized that the key to truly getting under someone's skin is variety. Too much of the same thing, and they'll adapt. But if you keep it fresh, keep it unpredictable, they'll never settle. And that's when life gets interesting. One morning I decided to experiment with sound in a different way. Instead of engines or tools, I reached for something a little more melodic. The didgeridoo. Now, I'm no professional player, but I picked one up at a market years ago, thinking it would be a fun challenge to learn. And while my skills left much to be desired, the deep, resonant drone of that instrument carried beautifully across the yard. I pulled it out at 9 in the morning, sat on the back deck with a coffee and gave it a go. The sound vibrated through the ground, across the fence, and I swear I could feel the annoyance radiating back at me. The best part, I wasn't even trying to be obnoxious. I was practicing an ancient cultural instrument, no less. Something nobody could criticize without looking like a complete fool. And that gave me an idea. I'd turn my newfound noise-making into a form of self-improvement. Every time the neighbors thought I was just being irritating, I could flip it on its head and claim I was learning a skill, pursuing a hobby, or bettering myself. How could they argue with that? So out came the guitar, and the harmonica, and a half-broken keyboard I'd rescued from a garage sale. Every instrument I owned, every squeak and squawk, became part of my personal growth. I wasn't annoying them, no. I was cultivating creativity, exercising discipline, nurturing the soul. At least that's what I told myself while I sat outside banging out the most tone-deaf versions of Waltzing Matilda anyone has ever heard. But here's where it got even better. See, passive-aggressive revenge isn't just about making noise. It's about sending messages, subtle, undeniable messages. So I started tailoring my performances to match the situation. If the neighbors happened to be outside hanging laundry, I'd grab the harmonica and play the most off-key blues I could muster, swaying like I was lost in the music. If they were gardening, I'd fire up the keyboard and pound out random notes like I was discovering modern jazz. And if they dared to entertain guests, well, that's when I pulled out the big guns. The didgeridoo, echoing through the afternoon like a call to war. I can only imagine what their friends thought, but that was the point. Every time they tried to live their lives, I became the uninvited soundtrack. Not constant, not enough to file a complaint, but always there, always lurking. Of course, I wasn't going to rely on sound alone. Oh no, if I wanted to keep this interesting, I had to think bigger. That's when I turned to sight. Visual passive aggression is an art form, and once you get the hang of it, it's as effective as any noise. My first move, garden ornaments, lots of them. I started with a few gnomes, nothing unusual. But then I added more, a flamingo, a kangaroo statue, a weird little ceramic frog that looked like it was judging you. Every week, a new addition appeared along the fence line facing their yard. Slowly, surely the collection grew, until it looked like a bizarre outdoor gallery, each ornament carefully angled to watch their house. Not a single word exchanged, just the silent stare of my growing army of lawn decorations. And oh, the satisfaction of catching them glance over, do a double take, and then quickly look away. Because how do you complain about garden gnomes? You can't, it's ridiculous. But when those gnomes multiply like rabbits, it starts to feel like a message that says, we see you, we're not going anywhere, and we're going to smile about it. By this point, I could feel the balance of power shifting. They weren't texting my partner anymore. They weren't harassing us about the dogs. Instead, they were stuck in their own private war of irritation, forced to deal with me and my ever-growing collection of passive jabs. And the best part, my partner started laughing. For the first time, she wasn't dreading their messages or stressing about the dogs. She was enjoying the show. Watching me come up with new ways to outwit them became our shared game, our inside joke. And that, more than anything, made it worthwhile. But still, I wasn't done. Not yet. Because while the gnomes and instruments were fun, I wanted something more. Something that would keep them guessing every single day. That's when I came up with what I like to call the schedule of subtle chaos. Every week I'd pick a theme. One week it was noise. Another, it was visuals. Sometimes it was both. Monday morning, car engine. Tuesday afternoon, whipper-snipper. Wednesday, a surprise didgeridoo concert. Thursday, a new garden gnome standing proud by the fence. Friday, a backyard, sing-along with my dogs howling in harmony. Each day brought something different, something they couldn't predict. And unpredictability, I realized, is the most irritating weapon of all. Because when someone doesn't know what's coming next, they can't prepare. They just sit in a constant state of dread, waiting for the next round. And I'll admit it, I got creative. One day, I set up a sprinkler right near the fence, so every time the wind blew just right, a light mist drifted into their yard. Perfectly innocent, perfectly explainable. I was watering my grass, but the way they stormed inside that afternoon told me everything I needed to know. Another time, I strung up solar lights along the fence, blinking softly into their windows at night. Not bright enough to break any rules, but just noticeable enough to keep them awake. By now you might think I was going too far. But here's the thing, they started it. They came after my dogs. They harassed my partner. They tried to bully us into silence. All I was doing was redirecting their own bitterness back at them, giving them a taste of their own medicine in the most legal, harmless yet maddening ways possible. And the results spoke for themselves. The texts stopped. The glares grew fewer, and more often than not, their blinds stayed closed, like they couldn't bear to watch me living my life out loud, which was fine by me, because every day they hid behind those curtains was another day I'd won. But little did they know, I wasn't even close to finished, because when you discover just how much fun it is to wind up people who've wronged you, it becomes addictive. You start seeing possibilities everywhere, and trust me, I was just getting started. The real turning point came when I realized that passive-aggressive revenge doesn't just have to be about noise or decorations. It can be about atmosphere, about creating an environment so cheerful, so relentlessly upbeat, that it becomes unbearable for anyone with a sour attitude. And my neighbors, well, let's just say they weren't exactly the type to appreciate joy. So I leaned into it hard. First, I started hosting barbecues. Now, I put that in quotes because these weren't massive parties with dozens of guests. No, they were just me, my partner, and a couple of close friends. But I made sure they were loud enough to sound like the happiest gatherings in the world. Music playing, laughter echoing, the smell of sausages and steaks drifting across the fence line. And every time I caught sight of my neighbors peeking through their curtains, I'd raise my glass in a cheerful toast, as if to say, "Wish you were here." The thing is, nothing enrages a miserable person more than watching other people enjoy themselves. And the more we laughed, the more we cheered, the more they stewed. It wasn't just about noise anymore. It was about energy. Our yard radiated life, while theirs sat in bitter silence. But barbecues were just the beginning. I decided to turn my backyard into a mini festival ground. Solar lights strung up everywhere, tiki torches on the weekends, a fire pit crackling in the evenings. And because I'm nothing if not thorough, I even invested in a cheap outdoor speaker system, not to blast music. No, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I played cheerful background sounds. Birdsong in the morning, soft jazz in the afternoon, and yes, sometimes even the sound of dogs barking, recorded, looped, and played at just the right volume. That last one was my favorite, because the second they heard it, I knew they'd assume it was my dogs again. They'd grit their teeth, ready to fire off another complaint, only to realize the sound was coming from a speaker. And what could they do about that? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. By this point, I was having so much fun that I started looking for new projects. And then it hit me. If they hated my dogs so much, why not make the dogs the stars of the show? I started small, teaching them a few tricks I could show off right near the fence line. Simple stuff. Sit, stay, paw. But I did it with over-the-top enthusiasm, cheering and clapping, like they just won gold at the Olympics. My dogs wagged their tails, barked with excitement, and lapped up the attention. And every bit of noise, every bark, every cheer, was another reminder to my neighbors that these dogs weren't going anywhere. So I started brainstorming. What else could I do? What other harmless, legal, yet utterly maddening tricks could I pull out of my sleeve? And the ideas started rolling in faster than I could keep up with them. Some were subtle, some were bold, and some were downright hilarious. And that's when I realized this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was art. By now, I'd turned my backyard into something between a carnival and an art gallery, and honestly, I was loving it. But I knew I had more tricks up my sleeve. If the goal was to keep them on edge, then the strategy was simple. Keep evolving. Because the moment they got used to one thing, I had to hit them with something new. So I asked myself, what's more irritating than noise, more unsettling than gnomes, and more confusing than dog portraits? The answer came to me one lazy Sunday afternoon while scrolling online. Wind chimes. Now don't get me wrong, I like wind chimes. But when you collect them in bulk and hang them all in one place, they transform from a gentle tinkle to a non-stop symphony of chaos. I ordered a dozen of them, all different shapes and sizes, and strung them up along the side of my house that faced the neighbors. Some were deep and gong-like, others were high-pitched and delicate. Together they created a soundtrack that never stopped. Every gust of wind turned my yard into a clanging orchestra, unpredictable and relentless. The first breezy afternoon after I hung them, I sat back in my chair, sipping a cold beer, and waited. Sure enough, I saw it. Their blinds snapped shut in one swift motion. Victory. But I didn't stop there. No, the wind chimes were just step one of my new ambient soundscape. Step two was bird feeders. Lots of them. I filled the trees and fence lines with seed, attracting a small army of noisy cockatoos, lorikeets, and magpies. Suddenly my yard was alive with squawking, chirping, and the occasional feathered brawl. Nature itself became my accomplice, and the neighbors had front row seats. And just when they thought it couldn't get any worse, I added the final touch, a cheap outdoor fountain with a trickling sound that echoed through the still evenings. To me it was peaceful. To them, I imagined it was like Chinese water torture. Drip, drip, drip. A reminder that I wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the noise. The best part was that everything I added made my own life better, too. The wind chimes were oddly soothing when you got used to them. The birds were fun to watch. The fountain brought a bit of calm to my evenings. I wasn't just irritating my neighbors. I was improving my home. It was the perfect crime. But of course, I couldn't resist pushing the limits further. One day, while walking through a discount shop, I stumbled across something I didn't know I needed until I saw it. A bubble machine. You know the kind. Made for kids' parties. Shoots out streams of bubbles non-stop. I bought it on the spot, and that weekend I set it up in the yard, angled perfectly so the bubbles floated up and over the fence into their yard. Imagine sitting in your backyard, trying to relax, only to be swarmed by hundreds of sticky little bubbles drifting down on your laundry, your garden, your hair. And the beauty of it? How do you complain about bubbles? You can't. You'd sound insane. That's when I realized I'd tapped into something powerful. Weaponized whimsy. Everything I was doing was playful, innocent, even childlike on the surface. But beneath it all, it was calculated torment. Because every garden gnome, every bubble, every cheerful bark from my dogs carried the same message. You can't control us. And oh, how it worked. One afternoon I caught the husband outside, glaring at my yard like it had personally offended him. He muttered something under his breath, shook his head, and stormed back inside. Another time, the wife tried to hang washing on the line, only for a cloud of bubbles to float over and stick to her sheets. The look on her face, worth every cent I'd spent. But the masterpiece of my passive-aggressive campaign came when I decided to combine all my tricks into one grand event. I called it, privately of course, the Neighbor Festival. It was a Saturday morning. At 9 a.m. sharp, I fired up the mower, running it along the fence line for a solid half hour. Then while the engine cooled, I started the bubble machine. As bubbles floated into their yard, I strummed a few chords on my guitar, singing loudly and badly, my dogs howling along like backup singers. By midday, the wind had picked up, and my collection of wind chimes came alive, clanging and tinkling in a chaotic chorus. I cranked up my outdoor spacker, blasting cheerful ABBA tracks, and fired up the barbecue, letting the smell of sizzling meat drift over the fence. My partner and I clinked glasses, laughing. while my dogs ran their little obstacle course in full view of our audience. It was chaos, beautiful orchestrated chaos, and I loved every second of it. Did the neighbors come out to complain? No. They stayed inside, blinds drawn, no doubt seething in silence. And that was the point, because by then, it wasn't just about the dogs anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about them, trapped in their own bitterness, while we lived freely, joyfully, loudly. The truth is, they could have ended it at any time. All they had to do was stop harassing my partner, stop targeting my dogs, and maybe, just maybe, even try being decent neighbors. But they chose the path of hostility. And I chose the path of relentless, playful revenge. And I'll tell you something. It was the most fun I've ever had. The thing about passive-aggressive warfare is that it's slow. It doesn't strike like a punch. It seeps in like water through a crack, wearing down its target day after day, until one morning they wake up and realize they're already broken. And by the time I reached the 6th week of my little campaign, I could see the cracks in my neighbors spreading wide. It started with small signs. The husband stopped mowing his lawn as regularly, maybe because the sound reminded him of me and my early morning mower serenades. Their curtains stayed closed longer in the mornings, and sometimes all day. The wife had once been out in the yard, constantly, hanging laundry and fussing with her plants. But lately I noticed she avoided it, especially when I was home. It was as if the space they'd claimed as their peaceful countryside retreat had become a battlefield they no longer wanted to fight in. And that was the irony. They'd moved to the country for quiet, for space, for peace. But instead they'd found me, my 3 dogs, my bubble machine, and a symphony of wind chimes. They wanted control. What they got was chaos. But here's the thing. I wasn't out to destroy them. I just wanted them to stop picking on my dogs, to stop harassing my partner, to stop acting like they owned the air we breathed. And I was prepared to keep the pressure on until they learned. One day, after I'd set the bubble machine running again, I heard a loud slam from their side of the fence. Then silence. For the rest of the afternoon, no movement. But the following morning, there it was. The unmistakable sound of hammering. Curiosity got the better of me, so I peered out. They were building something along the fence line. Tall wooden panels, hammered in with urgency, stretching higher and higher. A privacy wall. I almost laughed out loud. My festival of irritation had driven them to wall themselves off from me like medieval villagers hiding from a dragon. And honestly, it was the best outcome I could have hoped for. Because now, not only had I won, but they'd done the work for me. Their fence blocked the view, but not the noise, not the bubbles, not the birds, not the dogs. They could wall themselves in, but they couldn't shut me out. Still, I wasn't about to let them think the wall meant victory. No, the wall was just another prop in my theater of mischief. So naturally, I decorated it. I found a set of colorful prayer flags online, the kind that flutter in the wind, and strung them across the top of the fence. Every time the breeze blew, the flags flapped merrily, visible above their carefully built barricade. Then I added fairy lights, running them in a zigzag pattern along my side, casting a warm glow into their yard at night. It was cheerful, festive, impossible to ignore. The night I first plugged in the lights, I sat back with my partner and watched. Sure enough, not 5 minutes later, I saw their bedroom light flick on. The blinds snapped shut, tighter than ever. Another point to me, and yet, for all their frustration, they still never confronted me directly. Not once. Every complaint, every jab, every ounce of hostility had always been aimed at my partner. And the more I thought about it, the more it fueled me. Because it wasn't just about noise anymore. It was about principle. So I doubled down. I bought a pair of solar-powered garden speakers shaped like rocks. Harmless-looking little things tucked into the flower beds. And every morning at exactly 7:01 a.m., legally within the noise rules, they clicked on, playing a recording of kookaburra calls, loud, echoing, mocking laughter that bounced through the yard. Sometimes I mixed it up with rainforest sounds, or a playlist of cheerful Disney songs. But the kookaburras were my favorite because their manic laughter was the perfect soundtrack to this ridiculous feud. By week 8, the neighbors were shadows of their former selves. Their garden looked unkempt, their car wasn't washed, and I rarely saw them outside. Meanwhile, my yard had never looked better. Between the flags, the lights, the birds, the fountain, and the obstacle course, it was alive, joyful, buzzing with energy. My partner and I sat outside most evenings, sipping wine, watching our dogs chase bubbles, and listening to the distant sound of our neighbor's misery. And then came the breaking point. It was a Sunday morning, bright and warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the sound of wind chimes and kookaburra laughter through the air. I had the bubble machine going, the fountain trickling, and the barbecue already smoking. It was shaping up to be a perfect day. But then, for the first time in months, the husband came storming into my yard. No text, no message, no passive glances, just straight through the gate, red-faced, fists clenched. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to us?" he barked. I looked at him calmly, beer in hand. "What do you mean? All this noise, the bubbles, the chimes, it's insane. We can't sleep, we can't think, we can't live like this." I paused, took a slow sip, and smiled. Funny, that's exactly how my partner felt every time. You texted her while I was away. Every time you made her feel small. Every time you made my dogs the villain for doing their job. So yeah, I guess I do know. He stared at me, speechless. His jaw tightened, his fists trembled, but he said nothing. Because what could he say? He knew the council had cleared us. He knew I was within my rights. He knew the law was on my side. And then, without another word, he turned and stormed back out, slamming the gate behind him so hard it rattled the hinges. That was the last real confrontation we ever had. After that day, they retreated completely. Their wall grew taller, their blinds stayed closed, their yard fell silent, and mine thrived. Because in the end, it wasn't about noise or dogs, or even revenge. It was about teaching a lesson. Don't pick on people who aren't doing you harm. Don't harass someone who can't fight back. And definitely don't mess with a man who loves his dogs more than anything else in the world. The silence that followed their retreat was the sweetest sound of all. Not the clang of wind chimes, not the laughter of kookaburras, not even the joyful barking of my dogs, just the deep, rich silence of victory. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from peace. No, this was the silence of surrender, a heavy, resentful quiet that hung in the air like smoke after a fire. My neighbors hadn't moved away, but in every way that mattered, they were gone. I saw less and less of them as the weeks rolled on. Their yard became a ghost town. Overgrown grass, drooping plants, a barbecue that sat unused and rusting, where once they'd tried to claim this countryside lifestyle as their escape from the city. Now they cowered inside, blinds shut, air conditioning humming to block out the world beyond their walls. And me, I kept living. My partner and I enjoyed our evenings under the glow of the fairy lights, glasses clinking while bubbles floated lazily through the yard. The fountain trickled, the dogs played. Life was good. I'd glance at the wall sometimes, tall and looming, their desperate attempt to shut us out. But instead of intimidating me, it made me grin. Because to me, it wasn't a barrier. It was a trophy. Proof that I'd fought back, not with fists or shouting, but with creativity, persistence, and just the right amount of mischief. Sometimes I wondered if they lay awake at night, thinking about the moment the husband stormed into my yard, if he replayed it over and over, wishing he'd said something else, something smarter, something stronger. But he hadn't, and he never would. Because the truth was, I'd beaten him without ever breaking a rule, and that was the beauty of it all. Every move I made was within the lines. Every gnome, every chime, every burst of bubbles, all perfectly legal, perfectly innocent on the surface. If they'd gone back to the council to complain, they would have been laughed out of the office. Because how do you lodge an official complaint about fairy lights? Or bird feeders? Or bubbles drifting over a fence? You can't. That's what made it so perfect. My revenge wasn't cruel. It wasn't violent. It wasn't even overt. It was passive-aggressive art. And while it drove them to the brink, it made my own life better. That's what they could never understand. Every step of my so-called torment was just me enjoying my space my way. The fact that it annoyed them was just a bonus. The dogs, of course, were the real heroes. Loyal, protective, always on guard. They kept the house safe, and they reminded me every day why I'd fought this silly little war in the first place. Because to me they weren't just dogs. They were family. They were my kids, and no one, not nosy neighbors, not city slickers playing country life, not even the council, was going to make me feel ashamed of them. I think about it now, and I realize something important. The neighbors thought they were picking a fight about barking, but really, they were testing something deeper. They were testing whether I'd stand up for my family, whether I'd back down when they pushed, or whether I'd fight. And fight I did, not with fists, but with fireworks made of bubbles and laughter. So in the end, what did I learn? That sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or violent or cruel. Sometimes the best revenge is to live so joyfully, so unapologetically, that it becomes unbearable to the people who tried to make you miserable. I don't know if my neighbors will ever move away. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll stick it out, sulking behind their wall for years to come. But either way, I don't care, because I've already won. My home is alive with music and light and laughter. My dogs are free to bark when they please, and my partner no longer jumps at every text. We reclaimed our peace, not by hiding, but by shining brighter. And if the neighbors still hear the faint tinkle of wind chimes in their nightmares, well, that's just a little extra victory for me.